All right, I suggest that we start this webinar. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar that will be recorded about gathering relevant customer insights. We hope to inspire you the next 1.5 hours with some related tips and tricks. For now, I will also mute everyone, but we will foresee the webinar to be interactive or as interactive as possible via some polls and open questions in Microsoft Teams itself. There will also be room for questions during some specific moments in the presentation, but please do also not hesitate to interrupt me if necessary via the raise your hands option in Microsoft Teams itself. And of course, we have prepared an agenda, but before diving into the content, I would like to thank you all for being here today. We are really happy that you are joining virtually, and we are really happy to see different organizations represented here today. It's also different organizations from different sectors. You can see, for example, that we have some industrial organizations joining us, but also some government and healthcare institutions and some companies providing services. So I think it's okay to say that customer experience, or call it patient experience, citizen experience, is really relevant to everyone. I would also like to thank in special Florence from bpost, Market Intelligence Director, and Sylvie from Unile, Global Customer Service Manager, because they will share a hands-on example and some of the challenges they are still struggling with us in the end in a breakout room. I would also like to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Sophie. And after I graduated as an industrial and organizational psychologist at the University of Ghent, I started working as a consultant at Möbius, now almost 10 years ago. And since then, I worked for a lot of companies, but during recent years, I focused more and more on service and retail organizations, working for example, Carglass, Colruyt, Fluvius, and so on. And I think as providing an excellent service is essential for these companies, giving them advice on how to achieve this became therefore my great passion. So my projects are mainly about customer journeys, personas, market research, mystery servicing, and so on. And I think it's really nice as a consultant that you get to know the internal organization of a company via process mapping exercises or optimization pilots, but also that you can compare it with the results of a customer assessment. And I think this combination of inside out and outside in analysis is really what is triggering me to continue my job as a consultant for 10 years now. If we then have a look at our agenda, we would like to start with a short, rather theoretical explanation about our vision on customer experience. And we've integrated this part as we believe that working evidence base is crucial, taking into account models and research in the approach of our projects. Afterwards, we would like to share some tips and tricks related to qualitative and quantitative research. And then we will, as said already before, divide you in 2 breakout rooms. So both bpost and Unile, so Florence and Sylvie, can share a hands-on example and the challenge they are still struggling with. And then we'll all come back to this room again to do a quick checkout about how you experienced the webinar. So, all right, we will start with the first point on the agenda, so our vision on customer experience. And I think it's important to mention that we as Möbius believe that a customer organization can only be satisfied if the service he or she experienced or the product he or she experienced corresponds at least with the service or product he or she expected. And the typical quiz question that always raises here, and we would like to ask it via polls as well, is will a customer be more satisfied after flying with KLM or after flying with Ryanair? And normally you will all see now the question on your screen. So I will wait your responses and I will then continue. Okay, thank you all for answering, or we have 20 responses now. Okay, thank you. So I could have asked a very similar question as well. For example, will a customer be more satisfied after dining at McDonald's or after dining at Hof van Kleve? And as most of you know, the answer is not choosing between one or the other, but in realizing that a customer can be equally satisfied with both, as long as he or she, of course, had the right expectations. For example, not expecting any luggage service, free luggage service when flying with Ryanair, or not expecting any table service when dining at McDonald's. And according to the SERVQual model, which is where we base this on, there are a number of things that can influence a customer's expectations. First of all, client stories. So stories the client can have heard via friends, via word of mouth, but also stories the client can have read on social media, on customer fora. Can be stories from other clients, but also, of course, marketing actions that an organization has taken and that are spread via social media, customer fora, and so on. And I think it's needless to say that influencing through such channels has increased enormously in recent years. Next, the SERVQual model also says that a customer's expectations can be influenced by his or her own previous experiences. A previous experience is for the SERVQual model like an indirect future expectation, meaning that as a customer, you already have an idea of what the ease of service was in the organization, how was operational excellence, what was the price-quality ratio, or how did you experience it, and so on. And finally, the model says that customer expectations can also be influenced by the customer's own needs. How obvious is it, for example, for a customer that he or she can buy a product or service from your organization using multiple devices? Or how important is sustainability for the customer and your organization effectively contributing to it? And last, there can also be an influence depending on the lifetime a customer is in. For example, or which time in his life he is in. For example, there will be a difference between customers who have just graduated and customers who have just retired. And this is, of course, only the customer side of the SERVQual model. There is a business side as well. And on business side, there are two things, meaning that as a business or as an organization, you have to do a number of things to get those expectations clear and to act in line with the expectations. And the first thing is the importance of customer focus and intelligence, meaning that as an organization, you have to have an idea of who your different types of customers are and what expectations they have. And secondly, and that's the customer service specifications, you also have to succeed as an organization in translating those expectations in the services and products you will offer. And as we all know, sometimes things go wrong and a customer will be unsatisfied. And the SERVQual model states a number of gaps that can be the reason for this. And today we would like to focus on one of the gaps. We would really like to highlight that gap, and that's the knowledge gap. Meaning, in fact, that as an organization, you do possibly not truly understand your customer needs and expectations. And here we believe that both qualitative and quantitative research, and for sure combining those two research techniques, can really counteract the knowledge gap. And that's why we would like to give some tips and tricks related to both of them today. And before continuing, I will launch a new question via Microsoft Teams. And the question is if you have already experience with qualitative and or quantitative customer research. So I will give you some time again to answer the question. Okay, thank you for your answers. We have like an experienced group today, I think, because almost 80% has experience with both qualitative and quantitative customer research. I will launch another question as well. And question is, which type of qualitative customer research did you already invest in? And you can indicate multiple answers as well. Okay, thank you for your responses. So the technique that most of people already invested in is the one-on-one structured interviews with 32%, followed by observations with 28%. And if we then continue to the questions about, or the tips and tricks related to qualitative research, we would like to focus today also on the structured interview guide, as it is for sure in a B2B context, the technique that is used most often. And if you ask us what a structured interview guide is, we would say that it's like a fully written out document with an overview of all questions and sub-questions that you would like to ask the interviewee. And for us at Möbius, it has two main advantages. And first of all, it guarantees a thorough preparation because everything is written out in full. But secondly, it also guarantees a standard approach across all interviews, minimizing bias caused by the interviewee, but also possible bias caused by the interviewer. For example, if multiple people would conduct interviews. And based on our experience, we would say that an interview guide is like almost 5 pages long typically and contains on average like 20 to 25 key questions. And we would like to inspire you today about what type of questions you can ask your interviewees, your customers, and how you can structure the interview guides. And normally in an interview guide, we always suggest to start, of course, with an introduction moment, meaning that you really have to take some time to focus on the interviewee, him or herself. So do not talk already about your own organization or about the broader market where your organization is operating in. Really focus on the interviewee and ask him or her about what are important needs for him or her, important values, what are important parts of his or her job, and what is, for example, also the strategy his or her own company is pursuing for the coming years. Next, we suggest that a part of the interviewee can be about a quantitative analysis, meaning that in the end, you will know the place of your own organization in the broader market. And you can ask the interviewee questions like, for example, what other companies do you buy products or services from? Or which other distributors or wholesalers are you working together with? And this is really important because it will give an overview of the broader market. And it's also really important that you ask what were decisive factors in doing so. So why did the interviewee decide to buy products or services from multiple companies and not only from your own organization? Or why did he or she decide to work together with multiple retailers, wholesalers, and not only your organization? And normally you will get then typical answers like the price of the products, the quality of the products, but normally also some less evident things will be mentioned, like the broadness of the product assortment, the friendliness of the staff, having a feeling of a real partnership and not only a relationship and so on. So that was the second part, the quantitative analysis. And then the final part in the interview can, of course, be about your own organization, where you can ask about general satisfaction level of the interviewee, but also satisfaction level related to some specific aspects of the service or product you are providing. And here we always advise to map a customer journey being the journey your customer goes through when interacting with your company. And this can be done both in a B2C and a B2B context. And we've integrated an example for both. And we would like to start with a customer journey from a B2C company. And this is an example of a child allowance fund. And they came to us because, and I don't know if you remember, but at a certain moment in time, child allowance in Belgium changed, meaning that as a parent, you can choose your own child allowance fund now. So child allowance became privatized. Before that certain moment in time, child allowance was automatically regulated by the employer of the father. So this child allowance fund came to us and asked us to think together with them about which marketing actions they could take or which services they could provide to their customers to make sure that they would attract potential customers with relevant services and that they would get like a relevant market share or a great market share compared with competitors. And what we did in the first phase was mapping the customer journey. So really thinking about, okay, who are your potential customers? What are the different types of personas? And what is the customer journey they go through? So we started with mapping the key moments you go through as a mom. For example, I want to get pregnant, I am pregnant, my child is born, and I go back to work. But we also thought together with them about the key moments the children go through. For example, going to school, wanting to get a driver's license, doing a summer job, graduating, and so on. We also thought together with the client about some recurrent moments they could do some things about. For example, the birthdays of the children, vacation periods, Mother and Father's Day, and also some events that could have an impact. For example, moving to a new place or illness or accident of someone in the family. And this really helped us because afterwards we did qualitative interviews with pregnant women, but also with young parents. And we also sent out an online survey using a panel with 1,000 pregnant women or young parents. And it really helped because we could ask for potential relevant services broadly enough. And so we saw, for example, in the end, that the young parents were really interested, for example, in receiving a seasonal newsletter with some interesting tips and tricks about what they could do in the neighborhood, but also that they were interested in receiving administrative support on the key moments their children go through. And this was interesting for the company, of course. The next example is a customer journey from a B2B company, and this is from a provider of do-it-yourself material. So their customers are organizations like Hubo, Gamma, and other ones. And they came to us with the question to gather relevant customer insights. So really the main topic of this webinar. And we did in the end also some qualitative interviews with different personas and also sent out an online survey, but using the own customers database. And we started again with thinking about the different phases their customers go through. So for example, having a need for new electrical equipment and or lighting, then searching for possible suppliers on the internet or via word of mouth. Then having a sales phase where you have like the first contact, also discussion, negotiation, and it will end with like a signed contract. And then you have like the typical order to cash phases. So preparing the first order, placing recurrent orders that are delivered and that are paid in the end. And also possibly contact with after sales service. For example, if a customer has a question or if he or she needs any support. And mapping this customer journey indicated for the provider of do-it-yourself material that we needed to interview different types of personas because we realized that the organizations they work together with, for example, Hubo, Gamma, typically have like a structure where there is like the owner of the Hubo, Gamma retail shop, but then you also have like the buyer, the person who decides on everything that will be bought, and also in-store workers who have to decide on where they will place everything in the retail shop itself. So in the end, we did qualitative interviews, but not only with the owner of the company, but also with the in-store workers and also with the buyers and other relevant personas. And this was really useful because it was because of mapping the customer journey that we realized that one persona would not be able to tell us something about the whole customer journey. So we had to integrate multiple personas in our research. And if you then ask us who you have to interview and how many interviews you have to do, related to who you have to interview, it of course has to be a representative mix. As mentioned during the example, it has to be a mix of personas who can say in total something about the whole customer journey. And it's also important, if possible, that it's a mix of current and potential customers. And it can also be a mix, of course, of people you know yourself, but also people from the Möbius network. For sure, in pharmaceutical context or in healthcare organizations, we often know a lot of people we can also ask to do an interview with. And if you ask us how many interviews you have to do, normally 8 interviews per customer segment will be sufficient. But it depends, of course, on how many personas or segments you have. And the one golden rule that we always apply is to continue for as long as we receive new inputs. So if you do interviews and you hear the same as you have heard already before, you know that it's okay and that you can stop. But if you still hear new things, please make sure to still continue and to do some extra interviews if necessary. These were the slides about the qualitative research technique. I don't know if there are any questions? You can just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand. If there are not any questions, I will continue. So the next part of the webinar is about quantitative research. So there we want to focus on online surveys. And before continuing, I will again launch a question via Microsoft Teams. So the question is, what were the biggest challenges you were confronted with, for those who already invested in it, when executing quantitative customer research? If you want to add multiple things, I think that is possible as well, so you can still continue typing. You can also like the answers of the other ones. You can hover over the responses they have given, and then you can do a thumbs up. So thank you for answering. I see that response rate is a big one. We will tell something about it later in the presentation. You also see dropouts. It's related, of course, to the response rate. Open answers, open questions. Is there anyone who wants to share a challenge he has written down here? Want to give some further information?
Yes, I don't mind to share. We are still investigating how we could increase the response rate, and to be honest, it's quite difficult to find the reasons first, and secondly, perhaps the response rate is normal, the one we received. And that is sometimes difficult. With what do you have to compare? Knowing that a lot of customers receive a lot of surveys today, so we find it difficult sometimes to see how we should
know if it's a good result
the
or not.
rate we have. Is it normal? Is it not normal? Should we do something? Should we not? Enfin, that is the questions we are confronted with.
Okay. We have a part specifically about the response rate later on. If you would have further questions, then please just raise your hand then again.
Yeah.
I also see length of questionnaire. Maybe there it's important to say that normally research says that a questionnaire can be no longer than 10 minutes to fill in for the respondent. So it's always a good idea to test it and to see if it really takes like only 10 minutes, because it's longer, you will for sure get like a higher dropout percentage in the end. What can help for dropout, of course, as well, but I think you already know, is sending reminders. Not too much, of course, as well. But for sure, sending reminders to those people who already started with the survey, but who have ended, for example, like in the middle, sorry, because they will be more motivated to start the questionnaire again if the data are saved. But normally online tools always allow you to do that. All right, so thank you all for your responses. I see there is a question via the chat as well from Annelies. What about sending a follow-up questionnaire? Is that what I just told about the reminder, or do you have another question, Annelies?
It's not Annelies, I think, but anyway, it doesn't really matter.
It's Andrea, sorry.
Now, I was just wondering, what if you send a questionnaire, like a quantitative one, to, let's say, 100 participants, and that's only part of the questions you want to ask because it gets too long? Is it a good idea to send a follow-up questionnaire afterwards? Like, regarding
like
the
2
results you get,
questionnaires.
regarding the results, so should you always keep to one?
We always try to keep to one because, longer than 10 minutes is really not a good idea. I think what you can do is sending it out to like more than 100 people and asking them in the end if they were interested to work together in further research as well. That's something that we often use as well. For example, if we want to organize focus groups after the online questionnaire as well, we ask it too. If people who joined or who filled in the questionnaire completely want to participate in a focus group as well. And then normally you will have like, an okay response rate, let's say, because those people already participated in the online survey.
Okay,
so I think that can be a way to work it. Okay, thank you, Andreas. All right, then I will continue with the part about quantitative research. So we will focus on the online survey and we will focus on some topics related to it. So first example, how can you obtain a sufficiently large and representative sample of the population? Because of course you cannot address everyone. Second, the survey structure, or how to find a balance between getting as much information as possible and the survey that is still short, simple, and logic to fill in for the respondents. And last, the survey's reporting, or how to report the multitude of information obtained and prioritize next actions. So I will start with the survey's sample. And you can always, of course, use like online panels to send out your survey. But normally, when customers ask us to send out an online survey, it is sent to their own customer database. And then we go together with them through a couple of questions. First of all, how diverse is the population? So what about the homogeneity? So how many different types of personas do you have? And how big does the sample has to be for sure a good representation of the population? For example, people taking out a loan from a bank will be more homogeneous than the visitors of a hospital. People taking out a loan from a bank will be typically around 30 years old. Let's say it will be a couple, there will be with 2 and so on. People visiting a hospital, that will be a huge range of ages and so on. And then secondly, what is the expected response rate? And that's an important one, I think. And we've also prepared some questions related to it. So the first question, and I will launch it now, is what response rate did you achieve for your last online survey, or would you estimate to be achievable? And there are a couple of possibilities. Okay, thank you for answering. So I see that 50% says that they received a response rate between 10 and 20%, and then the following group between 5 and 10%. And we'll share some, general things later on. Next question is, did you foresee any incentive for the customers filling in the questionnaire? Yes or no? Okay, so 4 on 5 participants have answered with no, but 20% said yes. And then for those people, maybe the last question. So if yes, what was the incentive that you have given the respondents? Okay. Thank you for your answers. If we then focus on the response rate, we would like to mention that studies have indicated that receiving like a response rate of 5 to 10% is really logical in a B2C context. So when you're sending a survey to your own customers, and in a B2B context, it's normally around 10%, maximum 15%. So it's a bit higher. I see that when you mentioned the incentives you have given, that it's a lot of times that you raffled something, for example, cinema tickets, a voucher, and so on. Well, research has indicated that that does not really work anymore. It's better, in fact, and I saw it as well, to donate or to transfer X euros to a good or related charity for every completed answer. And in a B2B context, and that I want to mention as well, there are also two things that can really help to augment the response rate. And the first one is promising the respondents who fill in the questionnaire completely that you will share the results with them. And of course, you don't have to share everything, but you can share a limited amount of insights. And another thing that really can help in a B2B context is using your sales representatives, because the sales representatives have normally huge contact with all different customers via phone. And it's really good if you inform them about the survey. They can mention the survey when talking to customers, they can remind them, and they can ask them to fill it in as well. And so in the end, you can end up in a B2B context around or between 15 and 20% instead of 10 to 15%. And in a B2C context, as already mentioned before, it's normal if you receive only a response rate of 10% maximum. So I saw that response rates were sometimes even higher. So I think that's really good, a good job. The third question we discuss then with our customers is to what level they wish to perform subgroup analysis. So if a customer, for example, says that they want to compare customers from different countries or customers from different age groups, for example, citizens visiting a certain city, it's really important to mention that you need like 30 respondents per subgroup before you can check for statistically significant differences. And this, of course, also has an influence on who you will send the survey to. If you have, for example, only a limited number of customers in the Netherlands, then it's better to invite them all, because the chance that you will get like 30 respondents in the end is rather small. If you have all your customers in Belgium, then of course you don't have to invite all of them, because you will for sure get 30 respondents in the end. And the last question we always discuss is about time and budget. Of course, time and budget are important when sending out an online survey or when doing qualitative interviews. But I think it's important to mention that when you're sending out the survey to your own customer database, time and budget are not really important, because you will normally use an online tool. And no matter how many people you have to send the survey to, you can still use the online tool. And in the end, you will have to do the analysis no matter how many respondents filled in the questionnaire completely. It's another thing, of course, if you are going to work with a panel, because when working with a panel, you will have to pay per respondent. So it's really important to think about how much budget you want to spend. And it's also important, I think, in healthcare industry or in pharmaceutical organizations, because if you want to do research related to a disease that is not frequent, so that has a low incidence rate, you will, of course, also need a huge budget and also a relative big amount of timing to make sure that you can interview patients and also send out an online survey. If we then have a look at the survey structure, and here we believe that maybe is really in combining qualitative interviews with an online survey. And I will explain why we believe in this. So what we normally do after the qualitative interviews have passed, and what we also suggest you to do, is building really like an Excel document. And in the Excel document, we advise you to mention all interviewees. So each interviewee has like one column. And in the rows, you can write down all of the items the interviewee said something about. And can be something positive, something negative, can be a remark, can be no matter what. And in the end, hopefully you will end up with like a lot of items the interviewee said something about. For example, the price of the products or services you are offering, the quality of the products or services, the reachability, the opening hours, for example, really important in a citizen context. Then the broadness of the product, so if you have a broad range or not, and so on. And the idea is to get like at least 20 items. And what we also suggest is to check if those items are spread well enough over the customer journey. And this is again the customer journey of the provider of do-it-yourself materials, so with customers like Hubo, Hama, and other competitors. And here you can see the items we integrated for them in the online survey. And you can see, for example, that they are spread over the different phases. We had, for example, some items related to the search phase, for example, a clear user-friendly website, also a good catalog, availability of a wide product range, and also some long tail and outlet products. You can also see that we had some items related to the preparation of the first order or placing recurrent orders. For example, receiving in-store sales support, promotional support, having product manuals, correct information on the dimensions of products, and so on. And we also had, in the end, some items related to the after-sales phase. For example, receiving good advice after sales, a quick response if you have any question or complaint, correct handling also of a complaint, and so on. And I think this is really good because then you know that in the qualitative interviews, you have focused on the complete customer journey, and you will also do that in the online survey. And of course, you will end up like, let's say, at least 20 items. You can add items, of course, as an organization if you want to test something in the online survey as well. So you don't have to stop only with the items that came out of the qualitative interviews. And what we then suggest is that you ask two things about all those items in the online survey. So two questions that are going only about those 20 items. And the first question is about the importance of the items. And we suggest not to do it on a scale going from 1 till 10, because then you will end like with all items receiving a score from 8, 9, or 10 on 10. And in the end, you have no clue which item is more important than the other one. What we suggest to use is the MaxDiff question. And I don't know if everyone here has already heard of it, so I will explain it briefly. But a MaxDiff question, what you do there is you offer the respondents like 4 items at once. So 4 items of the 20 items in total, completely randomized. And what the respondent has to do is choosing like 1 item as most important at the right side and 1 item at least important. And the other 2 items are just untouched. And this will give you, of course, in the end, an insight in the relative importance of each item compared to each other. So the idea is that every respondent gets like 10 sets of 4 items completely randomized. So in the end, every item has been shown an equal amount of time to all the respondents that have filled in the questionnaire. So that's for the importance. The other thing that we suggest to ask about all the items, and this you can see here on the vertical axis, is the performance level or the satisfaction score. And this can be done on a scale from extremely unsatisfied to extremely satisfied. And what you can see here on the slide on the vertical axis in percentage is like the amount of people giving a score of very satisfied or extremely satisfied. And on the horizontal axis, so the x-axis, you can see the importance score, meaning that the more to the right, the more important the items were for the respondents. And what we would like to indicate with this slide, and it's related to the reporting, is that you can have like a really clear overview of what are the next actions you have to take and what you have to invest in. Because in the end, you can divide this grid in 4 quadrants. So the quadrant in the upper right corner is called promote. Why is it called promote? Because those items are really important to your customers related to the or compared with the other ones. And they also receive like a very high satisfaction score, for sure, the ones above. So that are really the strengths according to a specific persona. The other ones are points of attention, but still they are in the green zone. And what we then suggest our customers, or what we suggest you if you receive those results, is to really use those items in the marketing actions you are taking and to really use it as like unique selling propositions, because you will attract potential customers with it, because it's important for them that those things are really good in a company. The quadrant at the bottom right corner is called improve. So if you would suggest you to invest money in certain things or to make investment related to improvement, it's for sure to those things that the budget has to go. So you see returns, proactive communication, delivery time. You also see price of the products. Of course, some things can be neglected here related to the strategy of the organization. If an organization, for example, has the strategy to sell products or services that are from a really great quality, but for a higher price compared with the competitors, then you can just neglect this. Then you don't have to take any actions if it's just right for the strategy you are pursuing. And then finally, on the left side, so the left quadrants in the bottom and at the top, they are called monitor and maintain. And monitor means that those items receive like a not so high satisfaction score, but they are not really important to the customer for now. And that's why it's called monitor, because of course it can always be that an item moves to the right in the future. And if looking at the upper quadrant in the left, it's called maintain, because those items receive a high satisfaction score. They are not really important for the customer, but still it's important to maintain those items, but you do not have to invest in them based on the results of the survey. And that was a part about the quantitative research technique. So I don't know if there are any questions. You can ask them via chat. Or you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself as well. I think I don't see any questions. Then the idea now, if there would be questions after the breakout rooms, feel free to ask them. Of course, the idea now is that I will divide you in 2 breakout rooms. So as mentioned, both Bpost and Unilever, so Florence and Sylvie, will share a hands-on example and a challenge they are still struggling with. So my colleagues Dorothee and Susanne will facilitate the breakout room. And the idea is that afterwards we come back to this room where we will share like the most important learning points that we have taken away from the breakout room.